everyone, welcome to Spiritual Journey. Today we are going to talk about Saturn and Neptune, and those two outer planets are going to be significant over the course of the next year and a half. And in the larger scheme of things, in the next 36 years, because Saturn and Neptune come together every 36 years. And the last cycle began in 1989 in the sign of Capricorn. Now, Capricorn is one of those signs that wants to rise to the top. It's really about governments, making your mark in the world, becoming corporate, and starting businesses or starting your own business. This time, Saturn and Neptune are going to come together and they're going to land in the sign of Aries, another cardinal sign. And Capricorn ruled the MC, so public image, and how there was a reflection in what you did as a career played out normally and became really important. Now the ascendant is triggered on the world axis or the world chart, and the ascendant is more personal and Aries is more personal. And it's more about how we reflect outward into the world and how we are received. Now, the ascendant and doesn't represent necessarily who you are, sort of like the mask that we put on and how we want to be viewed by other people. And that is important here, as well as because our sun is really where it's at and who we really are. So we have these two planets coming together once again and beginning a new cycle. And it's really fresh because it begins in that very personal sign of Aries. And this really launches us into some new thought programs and new belief systems. So how we believe and how it's measured up into reality is important for the Saturn and Neptune cycle. How are you perceiving reality, and is it correct? So we have this ability here, and what's going to happen as the new system begins to kick in is we're going to start to dissolve structures, dissolve old ways of perceiving reality and what is really important. For example, one of the things that happened in the last cycle was the Berlin Wall fell. And this kind of really speaks once again to sort of waking up or realizing what our reality really is. And so there's big shifts that take place here. They're really karmic because Saturn is in the sign of Aries and karma is really cause and effect. And so that's really goes to you better be cautious what you wish for, because if you start that ball rolling, you can actually cause something which has an effect. And if we're really astute in our ability of awareness, we can actually foresee the effect or the outcome. Neptune is different than Saturn. These are very different planets. Saturn is realistic. It's hard-nosed. You got to pay your dues with Saturn. And Neptune is just kind of fly by the seat of your pants. It's illusionary, deceptive in some degrees. We can get swept away in our daydreams and our thoughts, and in many ways, what we believe in. So these two coming together can create this distortion of reality. But yet it can really penetrate through because Saturn creates fears, and we can really start to begin to fear our philosophies, viewpoints, new belief systems, ideologies, and concepts that are emerging in the world. And where does that come from? Does that come from that we're fearing somebody else's new models? And then how do we label them? Because Saturn sometimes labels or tries to um, create something, create solidification so we understand it in our minds, consolidation and crystallization. And it's important here with these two planets that we don't necessarily believe everything we see. And that's another combination with these two. And really realistically look at things with perception into, is that real, or is that just something that somebody has told me, or something that appears to be something but it isn't. And so there, in many respects, this can be rather deceiving or a distortion of reality. So we have the potential here to manifest and create dreams into reality. Is it really important? Previous to this, and a lot of people, because Saturn was in Pisces, that nobody was really taking responsibility for anything. And that is important with this new cycle, that we get to the root, which is the Saturn thing, and we find out who is really responsible. And so we also need to be responsible here personally for our own belief systems and how we interact with the world. We can't no longer, with these two planets that have rode through Pisces, give the illusion that no, it wasn't me, or no, that isn't the way it goes. So we need to be accountable in Aries for the things that we do. And if we are not, it can be very karmic. This is also an opportunity to become your own boss, which many of us want to do. And so there's illusions here of leaders and leadership because of the Aries influence, which has an impact on the individual and the path of the individual and what the individual seeks to do in life. So sometimes this can create acting on blind faith without any structure behind it. It's just an intuition feel that you got. And so you go for it. It's an opportunity that we can take control of our own direction. We need to be responsible for our illusions. And we need to be responsible also for our health. Because we have the North and the South Node on the health axis. But Neptune rules some of those establishments like hospitals and psychiatric wards, rehabilitation centers, dry out centers. So we need to be responsible for our health. And we could reach a point where you could be denied health care in the future. This is a potential. You could be denied health care in the future if you're not being responsible for your own health. It's kind of a trippy kind of energy because Neptune does rule drugs and Saturn rules the reality. So definitely there could be a clamping down and restrictions towards that. There's a real power positioning with this leadership combination. There is the possibility of corruption with Neptune always and deception, especially within leaders, governments, corporations, and that corruptive energy is going to really affect the individual and the direction of the individual. It could seem bizarre at times because Saturn rules government leadership and Aries is initiatives, new projects moving forward. And it could seem really strange, some of the demands or expectations that certain government officials or your local government places upon the individual, and the expectations there could be unrealistic. So, previous, and these two planets are going to slide back into Pisces this fall, into September, and then they're going to move out of there and move back into Aries by 2026. Pisces likes to smooth things over, like calm the waters, shove it under the rug. Let's just hide it someplace. And that could have been well within the realms of the last several years. But with Aries, we have new realities that are about to emerge and belief systems. And these can also generate hostilities, anger, and wars because of Aries. So we can get this really tangled. You mean I've been doing this all this time and you've been deceiving me? That you haven't disclosed this information for me, and therefore my hands were tied and I was limited in my capacity to act due to this deception. And that can make people really quite hostile. The interesting thing is this is happening right at 00 degrees of Aries, and it's going to really land there in February of 2026, and it's going to create this vortex funneling into here, because we have this mini triangle with Pluto and Uranus are going to be in trine, and then they're going to sextile into the 00 degrees. Now, 00 degrees is a point on the world axis that signals that the world is about to change, not just me and my own personal chart, but the world. Now, any 00 degrees is called is an important point because it rules the shift of the sun on the solstices and the equinoxes. And this can create a crisis in the collective world at large. So it's definitely 00 degrees. That means it's going to play out on a world stage, not necessarily on the individual or the individual chart, unless you have significant points around that 00 degrees of the cardinal signs. In many ways here, we could feel like we're kind of suspended in time with Saturn and Neptune here. We're reaching a precipice, a point where we're neither here nor there, but we're birthing something new, something different. And this can cause confusion and a lack of direction. Now, just think about the birthing process with any animal or human. There is a point of crisis that emerges through the canal, and then there's sort of a lack of direction, both maybe for the mother and the child. And where we're challenged here, where are we going next? And in the instant, everything can change. Saturn is very karmic, but Saturn's very stable, contained, strict, and it wants to give you what you deserve, what you've earned, what you've worked for. It's a really karmic, as I've already mentioned, and there is a cause and effect, and this is going to start to play out on the individual from past action, because Saturn rules the past, but also in future direction because of Aries. So as the effect of something, the effects of anything is always linked back to something that caused it. Even though we go, oh, that came out of the blue. That was just like wild. I don't know what happened there. Uh, but really, if you take a good hard-nosed look at it, chances are you can trigger it back to some event or something that actually caused it. And that really speaks to the legal system or the court systems, that we need to find out the root cause of what happened in the event and what is going on and how we can gauge that in the legal system. We need to be aware of karma here personally. And we can't leave it to chance with Saturn in Pisces when Saturn was in Pisces. We have to become consciously aware of how our actions impact somebody else and the confusion that that can cause another individual. And even though Aries is the individual, what about me? It's mine. I need to be looked after. We also need to be cognizant of the polarization of the other sign across from it, and that's Libra. Because quite often we're sitting in this house of whatever sign you're born into, and all of a sudden you look out across and you don't see yourself. You see what's across from you. And with Aries, that's Libra. A Virgo sees Pisces. Uh, a Scorpio sees Taurus, and vice versa. Capricorn sees Cancer. So, conscious awareness of where you're standing and the position you're in, and how is that reflecting outward onto the world. It's not going to work well if you just float along and don't take any initiative or don't take any of your own action. Your thoughts here are going to start to create. That's why these two together are great manifestation symbols. Saturn produces fear, the fear of the unknown. And that is Neptune. Is there a God? Isn't there a God? Is there and then Saturn structures it so we understand it personally. So it's a very fearful in many ways if we have new religions popping up, if we have new belief systems, new educational systems. And we could have the fear here of those things simply because we don't understand them and we have no knowledge of them. Saturn is used to being correct, reliable, consistent. Saturn produces stability, and there is no change with Saturn. Saturn just is there to support and adhere to the limitations that are present. So Saturn in many ways rules the laws, or the laws that govern the construct of our lives. Regulations in the government system, regulations in how we should behave, how we should act, and what we should be, how we should be functioning. What is the expectation? This could shift that expectation of the previous Capricorn connection that said you must become successful. You must rise up the ladder and do something productive. There has to be accountability here of your thoughts and your deeds in Aries. And so this plays into personal responsibilities and how you handle your actions and how you behave, what you're giving out to the world. Self-sufficiency will be key here to self-identification. So when two planets combine, they merge their energies together and they begin to try, even though these two planets are very different, they begin to try to work together to produce a blended compatibility with one another. Neptune is very different than Saturn's need to create boundaries and control. Saturn just dissolves old practices, dissolves the limitations, dissolves the expectations, and it does want to merge. It wants to merge completely without hesitation, with pure faith behind it, intuition or psychic phenomenon. It doesn't want walls. It wants the liberty to merge and go with whatever grabs it in the moment. So it's going to break down the boundaries of Saturn, and the lines begin to blur about what is acceptable, what is concise, predictable. And we begin to unblock ourselves individually. But yeah, this can throw us into kind of like a fog, like I don't know where I'm going next. I just feel like the bottom has fallen out. I'm confused. I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. So it relies solely on the intuition, that gut feeling, as men say, to guide us forward. And it relies on faith, God, or some other entity, creator, Allah, whatever you believe in. You know, it kind of reminds me, this whole thing is kind of like Merlin energy of magic, blind faith, prestige, recognition, because Saturn does that. It's really going to plug into the psychics, the and maybe give structure to some of that industry, and maybe some rules and regulatory systems. You know, here the landscape, because Saturn rules the landscape, begins to transform and change. And that could be with land itself, that they're taking old parcels of land or land that they otherwise deemed to be invaluable, and create something amazing with those pieces of land, and or structures. So the recreation is very possible. There's possibility of new worlds here for the individual and a new way of living, spiritually, spiritual connections. So does something exist without the threat of the universal energy? Questions like that could be asked. How far can we go? How far can we build? What can we build? So architecture definitely is going to be playing into this, the visions that we have. I should really look into seeing if the Titanic was born and birthed out of one of these visions or one of these combinations of Saturn and Neptune. because that was very karmic, and yet it was birthed and constructed bigger than life out of a dream, and thought itself to be invisible or invincible. So this can really build huge monumental things. Individuals can really skyrocket all of a sudden to great heights, but they can also have great falls. So is this the usage of something beyond ourselves that is just an illusion, or something we cannot see that begins to create our reality? Is the reality based on myth and mythology, something that's just spoon fed to us? So there's interconnections here between the spiritual world and the physical world that begin to merge together. I quite often look at the Taj Mahal and the deep love that that building was built upon, or the pyramids. You know, we can get swept away in thought, deed, but we can create unbelievable structures with this combination. You can, because now it's not a government construct like it was in 1989 with Capricorn. Now it's a personal thing. It's a personal construct, a personal business, a personal vision, a personal reality. So we can pretend to be something that we're not, steeped in lies and misconceptions. Or we can actually create something that is valuable. There's going to be, and long lasting, because anything built here with Saturn is going to really emerge as a long term and test the time schedule. There are all kinds of possibilities here. Saturn is traditional. It rules governments, bosses, leaders, authorities, those in positions of high standing, corporations. It's our infrastructure, our foundation. It's buildings. Neptune can stall Saturn, and Saturn can procrastinate. So we can have this elusive thing going on of a dream that doesn't manifest, but yet we can build. There are consequences here. So you need to pull back, find out where you stand, because there's going to be new religions that begin to unfold, political movements, reality begins to shift, the collapsing of the old system, and it just dissolves. And then there could be the start of cultural renaissance, new healing modalities that begin to emerge. We can have the emergence and the strict control of drugs, narcotics, which is already emerging now. Perhaps we could have a vision in the future and the cure for addictions. There can be diseases that emerge here that are long lasting because Neptune rules diseases, poisons. It rules the water. So there could be restrictions in the water and water constraints. You know, there's a lot of emotion here with Neptune, regardless of whether it's in a water sign or not. So we can get really emotional about certain timelines or expectations or rules that begin to govern us. We're going to encounter things that dissolve and remanifest in a different manner. There's espionage and spying. There's issues surrounding those institutions of, healing and health, the hospitals, those isolated places, and new structures could be built for prisons. New formats for the individual could begin to emerge. Pollution, poisons, and scandals could begin to erupt with Saturn, especially with those in positions of authority. Secrets could begin to bubble up to the surface. We could find our true purpose here and what we're really supposed to do. That the illusion of what the world expects us to do begins to fall away, and we self identify with Aries and go, I got it. I know what I was supposed to be doing all of this time. Neptune in Aries is rebellious. It is warlike against ideologies and how we perceive things. This can create crusades against certain religions or certain belief systems. It can spread really quickly that people latch onto it and grab hold and become part of it. These could be new political parties, new religions that begin to emerge. And we could really feel like the old systems are really dissolving and breaking down. So where was it? Where did we arrive? When did this last happen? 00 degrees can be the breaking of old patterns. It interrupts the system here and births something completely different. Because we are in patterns and we are in these waves of things that kind of work together. And then all of a sudden there's something completely different, which breaks the pattern, sort of like the eclipses break pattern and break us away. This was very similar to 1206 and 1219. And of course, the Crusades were there and new groups began to emerge. In 1534 and 1547, we really had a very similar time as now. Neptune was in Aries, Pluto in Aquarius, and Uranus in Gemini. And of course, we had a lot of communication that was going on there and a lot of information emerging. So if we fast forward, in 1861, we've got dissolution of the monarchy and the church and state kind of divided. Before that, church and state were one, as King Henry VIII certainly manifested. Their science versus spirituality was definitely a big part of what was happening or what could happen and could happen now, because Saturn is science and Neptune is spirituality. We had things like the theory of evolution, and we could start to see a new age emerge, as it did also with Helen Blavatsky and her new age of spirituality that began to emerge, and a new thought programmed came into effect. It's really important here that this quite often does and is really connected to the United States and their journey as a country. The Civil War plugs into this. Pluto in Aquarius plugged into the breaking away from Britain and the revolution. So wars are really part and parcel of some of this. Uranus in Gemini, of course, triggered the United States to enter the Second World War due to the bombing of Pearl Harbor. So it's interesting as this begins to emerge, and you talk about the Ukraine and their attack on Russia that was very secretive and undercover activities, and Aries' war and strategic planning, Saturn, that took place with that assault. There is so much to talk about and so many possibilities with Saturn and Neptune together in the sign of Aries that we can just let our minds wander and yet it can be created. You really need to be cautious about what you're expressing outwardly because Uranus is going to move into Gemini here next month in July. And that you don't get in arguments or disputes. You have to kind of know where you stand here in your beliefs. So if you're one of the mutable signs, you can Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius. You can really get kind of, we're always flip-floppy anyway. So you could kind of get a little carried away with believing one thing and then believing another thing. And then this can be perceived that you're a liar. And so you need to know where you stand with this combination because it is so personal. And it's plugging into that real personal energy. War over religions, Saturn is going to keep Neptune in check to some degrees by trying to establish rules and regulatory system, more regulatory system as if we need any more. We're kind of really boxed in right now. But what is really important, I think, here is that the primary thing that I think you really need to know here is that you need to be responsible for your actions. You need to be responsible for what you're putting out into the world. And you need to take responsibility for what it is that you want. That's a Saturn Neptune thing. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Please catch my other videos down below or to the side. And we'll keep in touch. And let me know if you need anything by booking a reading with me. So I'll see you later. Bye-bye.